For more than 50 years, Gene Dodaro has been a defining figure in U.S. federal accountability. Rising through the ranks of the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO, he became Comptroller General in 2010, steering one of the nation's most trusted oversight institutions through a period marked by technological disruption, fiscal uncertainty, global pandemics, and rapid evolving risks. His 15-year term ended on December 29th, 2025. Gene Dodaro joins the Business of Government Hour for a final conversation, reflecting on the journey, the accomplishments that shaped GAO's modern identity, and the challenges that lie ahead for the federal government. Gene, welcome back to the show. It's always wonderful to have you as my guest.
It's always good to be with you, Michael.
So I realized when I was preparing for this that you've been leading GAO since 2010, and you've served the agency for over 50 years. But when we first spoke, it was just right after your confirmation as Comptroller General. And now, 15 years later, as your term ends, how do you look back on the journey from that moment to today?
It's been just an absolute privilege to lead the people of the GAO. To serve the Congress, to serve the country, to be able to work on the most important national issues, to make a difference for the American people. We've been able at GAO to tackle big national emergencies. Even before I became Comptroller General and confirmed when you mentioned it in 2010, I was acting since March 2008. So I've had the opportunity to work with the Congress and the executive branch to deal with the global financial crisis, to deal with the Great Recession, to deal with the COVID-19 challenges and the pandemic challenges that were in place. So the GAO, through that, introduced real-time auditing. We're able to provide monthly briefings to the Congress, for example, on the pandemic spending, which was the largest American rescue package ever at $4.6 trillion. We issued bi-monthly reports, over 240 reports, 400 and some recommendations. I mean, I'm just privileged to lead the GAO through these type of national emergencies, which has cemented our reputation for the Congress as being a reliable source of accountability when the Congress has to take extraordinary measures to deal with national emergencies. Also, we've continued to focus on the high-risk program, which has yielded over $811 billion in financial savings, help improve services to the public, reduce vulnerabilities. Our overlap and duplication work, which has been going since 2010, has resulted in over 2,000 recommendations. Over 70% has been implemented. It's already saved $725 billion to our government. And with GAO tackles a wide range of issues. So I've also had the opportunity to build the workforce. I'm very proud of the fact that all 17 years I've been in this job, GAO has been ranked as one of the best places to work in the federal government by the Partnership for Public Service. In the last 5 years, number one among mid-sized agencies. So I leave behind just a strong workforce of dedicated, talented people who are focused on being great public servants, serving the Congress and the country. I've also been able to introduce and build and continue to evolve GAO's work, particularly in the science and technology area, which I set out to do. I hired our first chief scientist in 2008, even when I was acting Comptroller General. And now we've got a team of about 160 scientists of all different varieties. So we're able to help the Congress tackle issues in the executive branch in artificial intelligence and a wide range of applications there. Quantum computing on the horizon, regenerative medicine, all sorts of brain-computer interfaces, all sorts of areas of science and technology, which is evolving faster than any time in human history. So the country and the Congress need capabilities a GAO to assist them in that area. So I'm very proud that I've maintained some of the great traditions of the GAO, high risk list being an example, introduced new initiatives, including overlap duplication, the tackling of real-time auditing to help in national emergencies, and to build the capacities in science, technology, and other areas. So I've been able to continue the evolution that's part of the GAO story for over 100 years now.
That's great. None of this gets done without the people, right? So it's a great point. And I'm just wondering, when you think of all the challenges you faced during your tenure, the whole 17 years, including when you were acting, how these challenges, what lessons have you learned around the importance of resilience and adaptability in being a leader at your level?
Well, you have to be calm. You have to be confident. You have to be collected. You have to quickly figure out what you're facing, how you can marshal the resources, develop the right strategies in order to do things. You need to be decisive, but you need to really provide that type of leadership in the moment. You can't, it's like when the pandemic hit. All of a sudden, we've had to close all of our physical locations. We had prepared to do more work remotely, but not 100%, but we quickly pivoted. And I remember people telling me, well, gee, we're not going to be able to hire anybody now because we're all remote. I said, wrong. This is the perfect opportunity to hire people. We got to figure out how to bring them in remotely. And we were able to do that. Just to give you one example. So you need to have confidence. You need to be optimistic. You need to be able to meet the moment. You can't be deterred. You have to be committed that you're going to tackle the challenge no matter what, that you will figure out a way to get there in order to provide the type of support we need to provide to the Congress and the country. And you need to be able to continue to listen to people. During the pandemic, for example, there were a lot of concerns. People had relatives that were infected and died. People had their kids were home from school. They were, but we had this responsibility to provide monthly reports to the Congress, real time, on whether or not the federal response was improving public health, was dealing with the economic repercussions of the pandemic, while at the same time our people were affected by it as well. So communication, communicating a vision, communicating confidence, being calm in the face of these challenges, and having a clear path for how we're going to accomplish these things, given all these extenuating circumstances. So it's just, that's how I've approached all of these things. And, my belief is, a lot of times people will say, well, how can we do that? We've never done that before. How are we going to report every 60 days? How are we going to brief every month? We said we scope it properly. We're committed to doing that. Here's how we can do it. So you have to show people how these things can be done and support them in doing it and pitching in and spending the time and to explain to them how to do it, to provide leadership by example. I've always tried to do that as one of my underlying principles. And that is how you can, get through these type of things and not only get through them, but excel. To me, these type of things are challenges to not only just cope with, but to excel in, to show that you have the capabilities to tackle the most important issues facing mankind in a lot of situations, and not just, muddle through them, but to, show excellence in doing that and rising to the occasion.
I want to take a little time and get your perspective, Gene, on the high risk list and systemic challenges in certain ways. And you've mentioned the high risk list before. It's a signature tool for driving government reform. How, in your view, has it evolved and how has its impact changed over time? But more importantly, Gene, I'd love to get your perspective on what the current state of the 2025 high risk list tells us about the federal government's progress and its remaining vulnerabilities.
Sure. The high risk list originally started out focused on fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. And there were some scandals that occurred in the late 1980s. Congress asked us on a bipartisan, bicameral basis to flag risk ahead of time so that attention could be focused on that to avoid these type of scandals. And so, but over time, we've also found that it's an effective tool for highlighting areas in need of broad-based transformation that aren't necessarily fraud, waste, abuse, or mismanagement per se, but need transformative change that they've outlived their usefulness. One example I'd give would be the Postal Service. I mean, the Postal Service business model is no longer viable in the long term. I mean, electronic communications greatly altered first class mail, which is their most profitable item. So their business model needs to evolve and change over time so that it can be sustainable. Computer security, I mentioned earlier, that's a transformational issue that needs to take place, particularly protecting critical infrastructure protection, the electricity grid, the financial markets, our telecommunication systems, our transportation systems, our water systems. All these things now are very dependent on technology that people are trying to exploit all the time. And this creates a homeland security, national security issue for us, not just in government, but in the private sector and all these structures that we rely on. So that's another example. Food safety has been an issue. Drug oversight of drug safety, for example, all our markets have moved from from domestic production to global production. Most of the drugs and ingredients for drugs come from foreign sources. So in order to ensure safe use in the public, we have to alter our strategies for these oversight processes. Same thing with food. Although we produce a lot of our own food in some categories like seafood, fruits and vegetables, we're relying more and more on foreign sources as well in these areas. Now, there's a lot of vulnerabilities in the current list. I mean, there's a number of things that have been dealt with over time, which I'm very pleased with. We were able to remove the issue we had about weather satellites several years ago. Where the weather satellites were aging. There was no plan to replace them. There could be potential gaps. Congress allocated funds. The agencies, both NOAA and the Air Force, were able to get systems up in place to replace our polar orbiting satellites for long-range forecasts and geostationary satellites for short-term capabilities. So I'm very pleased, and that's essential, particularly now that we're having more frequent and severe weather events. And so we're able, because the high risk list focused on this, we're able to better protect life and property and help with economic effects by better warning systems to people. Now, to carry that forward a little bit, we just added disaster response as a new high-risk area. FEMA, in particular, is stretched way too thin. It's managing over 600 disasters. There are 30 different federal agencies involved in response and recovery. It's way too complicated for survivors to navigate. So that whole area is in need of reform. And FEMA's been an interesting, over time, if you look, it was a freestanding agency. Then it got merged into Homeland Security. A lot of the attention originally in Homeland Security was dealing with counterterrorism and so FEMA kind of lost a little bit of advantage. And then, of course, Katrina and Rita hit in 2005. A couple of years after Homeland Security had been created, 2003. And so the attention then shifted back toward them a little bit. And now, there's attention focused on immigration and border security and immigration appropriately, but FEMA's again, not in the forefront. But there's efforts to reform it. We designated as high risk before the president put the council together, and I'm hopeful that between that and some legislative proposals on the Hill that reform will be in the offing for FEMA, over time. There's still remnants of the global financial crisis in that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are still on the high risk list, and housing reform. I mean, so they've been in government conservatorship since 2009. We need a plan to return them to a different type of status. Most of the risk in the housing area right now lays at the federal government's doorstep, so we need to deal with that. We also had modernizing the financial regulatory system on the high risk list since the global financial crisis, and a lot of changes were made in the Dodd-Frank Act following that crisis. But most recently, a couple of years ago, we had big bank failures in Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank and First Republic Bank that showed there were still difficulties where there were vulnerabilities in the banking system that weren't elevated enough time through the regulatory system to deal with it effectively before to stave off these failures. So there's a lot to be done there still in those areas. The one area, last one I'd mention, Michael, because I could go on for a long time, of the 38 areas, but the one that touches a lot of high risk areas is the workforce. 21 of the 38 areas are on the high risk list in part because of skill gaps and shortages. It's not just numbers of people, it's the right type of people to be able to do it, whether you're talking about nurses and doctors in the VA system, or you're talking about petroleum engineers in the oil and gas area and interior, talking about people that do cost estimating and sophisticated weapons, space systems. I mean, the federal government needs the right type of workforce with the right type of skills. And I know there's efforts being made now to reduce the size of the federal workforce. And I've been spending a lot part of my career trying to make government more efficient and effective, and certainly that having the as lean of a workforce as possible. But you need to go about it in the right way to make sure you end up with the right people. Otherwise, you're going to potentially elevate your risk, not reduce it. So we'll be watching that very carefully as these efforts unfold over the next year or two. So that'll be a big part of looking at the high risk list going forward. As you talked about earlier, here at GAO, it all revolves around having the right people. Well, it's not just here at GAO. That is true of organizations throughout the federal government. And I've seen many policy initiatives developed by many administrations over my career that may be well conceived, but ultimately is not executed effectively because you don't have the right people and the right systems in place to be able to achieve your outcomes.
You've laid out in our conversation a number of cross-cutting challenges. I was wondering, are there any? What are the most urgent cross-cutting challenges federal agencies must address in the next decade, Gene? And more importantly, are there emerging risks or systemic issues that you believe deserve greater national attention?
Well, I talk in the hearing about the computer security, critical infrastructure protection. I think still the federal government, despite its efforts, is not moving at a pace commensurate with the evolving grave threat that occurs, particularly in critical infrastructure protection. And so that's an area, and that's going to continue to evolve. AI holds some progress to help, but it also has a dark side and can complicate computer security. Quantum computing is, relatively speaking, right around the corner, potentially. It will decimate all encryption that we currently use to protect this information. So you can't take your foot off the gas on this issue. And I know it's an elusive subject, but it's a real risk, and we're at real danger of being exploited in that area. Disaster recovery is the area we put on the list. I think that because it's involves a number of different federal agencies, is in need of reform. That it's clear that we're continuing to have these severe weather events, and we got to be prepared to deal with it. And it's complicated because there's every level of government's involved. Federal, state, and local governments are involved in this, and we need to have a coherent set of expectations on who's responsible for what, who's going to pay for what. And the federal government can't continue to be involved in all the things that they've been involved with before. But how do you rationalize their responsibilities? Healthcare is the fastest growing part of the federal government's budget and is driving the long-term unsustainable issue. So how to control healthcare costs while getting high-quality access for people and high-quality services, deal with an aging population, is a big challenge. Now, among the other healthcare needs that we've pointed out, where there's been some progress, like, for example, misuse of drugs, both illegal and legal. Since we put that on the high-risk list, the amount of overdose deaths has come down from well over 100,000 to the last 12-month figures around 79,000. So I'm pleased with that progress, but we need to continue to make progress. That's still an extraordinary number of people who die every year from overdose. Mental health issues are a big challenge. Both at the Veterans Department, we still have 17 veterans a day committing suicide on average. I mean, I think that's not acceptable. But there's a shortage of mental health workers, beyond just VA. That's also, plays a role in the drug misuse area. I think we're not materially any better prepared for the next national public health emergency than we were before COVID. That's on our high risk list, as well going forward. There's a wide range of issues that continually need to be dealt with. Those are just a few, Michael, that I'd point out from the high risk list. There are many other challenges facing the government right now. GAO is putting together a new strategic plan, working with the Congress, with outside input from experts, and that'll be developed early next year, and that'll lay out some of these other trends. I mentioned many of them in the science and technology area, and there's certainly many things are evolving in that area that we need to deal with as well.
That's great. Thank you for that perspective. But Gene, I was wondering, what advice would you give to your successor about leading GAO through the next 15 years?
First, really work to demonstrate your professional, nonpartisan, independent status. You have to cement that reputation on both sides of the aisle, both chambers in the Congress. Recognize you're in the relationship business as well as an auditing business. Get to know the members, both parties, their interests, priorities. Make sure you're outreaching to the executive branch agencies to have good, open communications with them. I would say trust the people at the GAO. When you come in, you're inheriting a talented, knowledgeable, experienced workforce that can help guide you, because our portfolio is everything federal government's involved in. So no matter who comes in, there are going to be aspects of the federal government that they may not have been exposed to before, or only exposed to very briefly. So you need to work to build good, trusted relationships within GAO as well as having these outside relationships as well. And to, work to provide, make sure we're communicating effectively in order to make sure that GAO continues to have the impact that we've had. You mentioned how much money we've saved, over trillions of dollars, and how many other benefits to public safety, public health, and others. All that comes from having good foundation as being a trusted source of advice and analysis, but also effectively communicating that in a world where there's so much information being available to people to break through that and to get people's attention to focus on what we believe needs to be reformed is a constant challenge and needs, continued attention and sharpening of our message and communicating it as in an effective way as possible.
This has been a special edition of the Business of Government Hour, Reflections on Public Service, with Gene Dodaro, former Comptroller General of the United States. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.